Now for the gospel reading, I wonder if there are three of you who would be willing to participate in this reading, Mark 13.
But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man arriving in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels, and will gather the elect together from the four winds, from the end of the earth to the end of heaven.
Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see these things happening, you know that it is near, right at the door. I tell you the truth. This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away.
But the exact day and hour, no one knows that, not even heaven's angels, not even the Son, only the Father. So keep a sharp lookout, for you don't know the timetable. It's like a man who takes a trip, leaving home and putting his servants in charge, each assigned a task, and commanding the gatekeeper to stand watch. So stay at your post watching. You have no idea when the homeowner is returning, whether evening, midnight, cockcrow, or morning. You don't want him showing up unannounced with you asleep on the job. I say it to you, and I'm saying it to all. Stay at your post. Keep watch.
Thank you for that reading. So on this first Sunday of Advent, I know that our theme is readiness, being on the road to readiness. And we're going there. But for me, the very first word of Advent is always, do not be afraid. That's the beginning message of Christmas and the Christmas season for me. The message that angels brought over and over again throughout the scriptures, and then in the gospel to Zechariah, and to Mary, and to Joseph, and to the shepherds. Whenever God is about to be revealed, and they are terrified, and it feels like the sky is ripping open, and it feels like the world is ending, they hear this, do not be afraid. When Mary, the mother of Jesus, heard, do not be afraid, she took a deep breath, and she somehow accepted the awful power and the great beauty of bringing life into this world. She found out she was going to be the mother of a baby who would live God's life on earth. And she got herself ready for the road by praying this astonishing prayer. She said, let it be to me as you have said. Let it be. I can't help but think of the song. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Whisper words of wisdom, let it be. I think that Mary, when she's waiting and hoping for God's peace and compassion to show up in her world, among her people, I think she could have sung that song that Paul McCartney wrote about his mother. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. When all the broken-hearted people living in the world agree, there will be an answer, let it be. For though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer, let it be. Mary got herself ready for the chance, for this hope that she held deep in her Jewish heart. The words of the Hebrew prophets, that in a world made dark and unjust by hate and greed and cruel circumstance, there is still a light to lead us home. Advent is a Latin word that means arrival or coming. It's actually a translation of a Greek word, parousia, which is used in the Bible to refer to the second coming or the return of Christ to earth. And maybe that's why at the beginning of Advent, a season that is all about preparing to celebrate the birth of Jesus at Christmas, maybe that's why our Advent tradition begins by jumping ahead in the gospel and listening to Jesus, all grown up, quoting the prophets. And he's saying, the sun will burn out, the moon will go dark, the stars will fall burning from the sky, and the mountains will crumble and melt, burning into the heart of the sea. And the human one will come in the clouds with great power and glory. I don't really think Jesus or the prophets were very interested in telling us what's going to happen someday. I think these words were more to express the pain and the terror that is felt by people every day, in every generation. They can express our confusion and anger and longing and hope that God's light will come, that God's love will prevail. Jesus said in this gospel passage, this generation will not pass away until these things have happened. But in some ways, we can read these words and say that every generation sees these things happen. Every generation sees the world crumble and fall apart in some way. You don't need me to list all of the ways the world is falling apart. Every year, Advent admits that the world is in trouble. And every year, Advent wants to wake us up and to get us to let go of a sentimental and rosy Christmas kind of denial, and to go clear-eyed into the presence of God with us, saying, yes, there's darkness in this world, but do not fear. That's Christmas right there. The world is falling apart, but do not fear, for God is with us. God's light is among us and within us. We've heard Jesus and the prophet Isaiah talk about tearing the sky open. The Gospel of Mark actually begins and ends with this ripping and tearing. In chapter 1 of Mark, Jesus comes to the river to get baptized by his hairy cousin John. Mark describes the scene there in the Jordan River. The sky is torn open, and the Spirit in the form of a dove comes and rests on Jesus' head. This is God's Son. God is well pleased. And at the end of Mark's story about Jesus, the end of the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus dies on a Roman cross, Mark hears this ripping and tearing again. This time it's the thick curtain in the Jerusalem temple. It was a curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the place that symbolized the living presence of God. So for Mark, the heavens and the temple are both torn open. It's as if the gospel says to us, and Jesus says to us, God is no longer far away. God is not hiding from us in the sky. God is not sealed off in the confinement of the temple. God is with us. Don't wait for the sky to fall. Don't stare into the clouds. Look for God right here, right now. Well, Jesus said, no one knows about that day or hour, but I'm telling you, all of you, keep alert, watch, stay awake. This no one knows the day, the hour. Sounds like Jesus warning his disciples. And earlier in that conversation, he did. He said, in that time, if anyone says to you, look, here is Christ, there he is, don't believe it. Don't be alarmed, he told them, by talk of wars and rumors of wars. Basically, in this scene, the disciples and Jesus are visiting the temple in Jerusalem. And Jesus notices his disciples. And they're maybe like we would be as tourists at European cathedrals, just impressed with these beautiful, massive buildings. And the disciples are overly impressed with these human representations of God's presence. And Jesus notices. They leave the temple and they say, wow, look at the massive stones. Look at these magnificent structures. And Jesus says, not one of these massive stones will stand. The whole thing is going to come down. That sounds like the end of the world to them, Jesus' disciples. So they ask for a sign. When? When is this going to happen? How are we going to know that the end is coming? But Jesus doesn't take the bait on that one. He steers us away from that question as well. No one knows the day or the hour. Timothy Geddert writes in his Believer's Church Bible commentary on Mark. He says, Mark 13 is not about signs and timetables. It's about not being fooled by people with signs and timetables. It's about being faithful to Jesus and the way of God that Jesus showed us. It's about being ready to share God's do not be afraid in a world full of fear. Jesus showed us what God looks like, alive in a falling apart world. God looks creative and kind and beautiful and true. And God draws us into creativity and kindness and beauty and truth. And Jesus' presence on earth announces God's love for all with the message, do not fear. Getting ready and listening to these holy voices saying, do not fear, takes on a new meaning for this congregation, particularly in your work of a pastoral search. It is a time to prepare for the ways God is, and will be alive among you. Time to get ready for what is growing inside of you, what is about to be born in you. Waiting is creative and courageous. It's a time to be open and ready and accepting. To say, let it be, let it be. With an active faith like Mary, whose let it be sort of started her off on a scary and exciting and a world-changing journey to Bethlehem. So I think Jesus, in these kind of dark words in Mark 13, where he's quoting the Hebrew prophets, he's really announcing a creative event, not a destructive event, a creative one. He goes on to talk about a fig tree blossoming, promising healthy and sweet fruit. And I read earlier from Isaiah 64, where we get the image of a potter up to her armpits in mud, always finding something new to love in this human creation. Never quite finished with this good work. Even though we're up to our ears in our sins and iniquities, God is never finished with this good work in us. When the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. This Advent journey we're getting ready for takes us steady on, straight into the light of God. Jesus' birth points us again and again in this direction, God's light. The gospel certainly doesn't deny the darkness, the brokenness, but it holds out this stubborn hope that God's light and love was the beginning and will be the end of all things. Philip Clayton is a theologian at Claremont University, and I like what he says about theology. He says, traditional theology tends to look backward. It is interested in God as the cause of all things. Philip Clayton says, I'm interested in theology that looks forward, that sees God as the goal toward which all things are heading. And here we are on this Advent journey, continuing, having another opportunity year after year to point ourselves in the direction of God's light, to go that way, and also to receive that light that is coming toward us in this time. We see where we're headed in the Christmas season, when God's love wakes up, kicking and screaming in the cave behind the house in Bethlehem, and God is alive for all to see in the body of the baby Jesus. We see we're not waiting for the end. We're not waiting for the sky to break open, for the seas to boil. We're waiting for God's never-ending love to grow in us, waiting for Jesus to be born in us again and again. And we're praying for God to make us ready for this. Let it be. Amen.